My brother said I couldn't bring my wife to Thanksgiving because she makes people uncomfortable. She's in a wheelchair. I sent him a photo from the resort we booked instead. Then Mom texted, "Bring back the pie dish." I replied, "Ask the able-bodied one." The phone felt cold in my hand, colder than the November air seeping through the window frame of our small apartment. It was a weight, a dense, dark little rectangle of glass and metal that had just detonated my world. I stared at the screen, at the words my own brother, Mark, had sent me. The message glowed with a kind of obscene innocence, black text on a white background, as if it were discussing the weather or what time to show up for dinner. But it wasn't. It was an execution. "Hey man, about Thanksgiving," it began, so deceptively casual. "Listen, we need to talk about Alara. Mom and I were talking, and it's going to be a bit much this year. She makes people uncomfortable." I read that last sentence over and over. She makes people uncomfortable. My wife, Alara, the woman I had loved for a decade, the woman who had faced a diagnosis that would have shattered most people and had done so with a grace that still left me breathless, the woman who navigated a world not built for her with a quiet strength that was the bedrock of my own. She, who was currently in the next room humming along to some old soul song while sketching in her notebook, made people uncomfortable. My thumb hovered over the reply button, a useless little digit trembling with a rage so pure and so hot it felt like it could melt the screen. What do you even say to that? How do you respond to a statement that is not just an insult, but a fundamental rejection of the person you love most in the world? A rejection of your life, your marriage, your reality? It wasn't an opinion. It was a verdict. She, and by extension I, were judged and found wanting, unsuitable for the perfect family portrait of a Thanksgiving dinner. I could hear the soft scratch of her pencil on paper from the living room. It was a sound that had become part of the background music of our lives, as familiar and comforting as the hum of the refrigerator or the creak of the floorboards. Alara had been an architect before the accident. Now, she drew. She drew buildings that would never be built, cities of impossible grace and beauty. And she drew portraits, capturing the small, fleeting expressions on people's faces with an unnerving accuracy. She saw people, all of them, and my family, my own blood, was telling me they couldn't bear to see her. The discomfort wasn't about Alara. It was never about her. It was about her wheelchair. It was about the fact that her presence reminded them of things they didn't want to think about: fragility, misfortune, the messy, unpredictable nature of life. Her chair was a physical manifestation of the truth that things can break, that bodies can fail, that the neat and tidy narratives they built for themselves were a lie. They wanted a holiday from reality, and Alara, simply by existing, was a disruption. She was an inconvenient truth sitting at their perfectly set table. I backed out of the message thread, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breath was shallow, ragged. This wasn't the first time. Oh, it was never the first time with them. It was a campaign, a slow, grinding war of 1,000 paper cuts. It was the forgetting to mention that the restaurant they'd chosen had 3 steps at the entrance and no ramp. It was the family barbecue where the only accessible bathroom was out of order. It was the constant, cloying offers of help that were less about assistance and more about highlighting her dependence, infantilizing her in front of everyone. "Oh, let me get that for you, dear," my mother would say in a high, pitying voice, snatching a glass from Alara's hand before she could even reach for it. Each time I had made excuses for them. "They don't mean it," I'd tell Alara later, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "They're just from a different generation. They don't understand." And Alara, my endlessly patient, endlessly kind Alara, would just squeeze my hand and say, "It's okay, my love. I know, but it wasn't okay." And she knew that too. I saw it in the flicker of pain in her eyes before she smoothed it over with a smile for my benefit. I was a coward. I had been choosing their comfort over her dignity for years, and I had dressed it up as keeping the peace. This text, though, this was different. This wasn't a microaggression. This wasn't a thoughtless oversight. This was a policy statement, a declaration. She is not welcome. They had finally said the quiet part out loud, typed it out in stark, undeniable characters. There was no room for interpretation, no space for me to perform my usual gymnastics of denial. They had drawn a line, not in the sand, but in concrete. On one side was them, their comfort, their curated illusion of a perfect family. On the other was my wife, my life. I walked into the living room. Alara looked up from her sketchbook, her brow furrowed in concentration. The late afternoon light caught the silver threads in her dark hair. She had a small smudge of graphite on her cheek. My heart ached with a love so fierce it was painful. "Hey," she said, her voice warm. "You're quiet. Everything okay?" She knew. Of course she knew. She could read my moods like one of her blueprints. I couldn't lie to her. Not about this. I knelt beside her chair, took her hand. Her fingers were cool, strong. I held up the phone. I didn't say a word. I just let her read. I watched her face. I saw the initial flicker of confusion, then the dawning comprehension, and then a deep, profound hurt that settled in her eyes. It was a quiet devastation. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry out. She just absorbed it, the way she absorbed everything, with a stillness that was more heartbreaking than any outburst could ever be. She handed the phone back to me, her gaze dropping to her own hands, resting in her lap. "Oh," she said, her voice barely a whisper. That single, small sound broke something inside me. The dam of my cowardice, of my years of appeasement, finally shattered. The rage I had felt moments before returned, but this time, it was different. It wasn't hot and chaotic. It was cold, clear, and sharp as a shard of glass. It was the clarifying anger of absolute certainty. This was the end. The end of the excuses, the end of the compromises, the end of me sacrificing my wife on the altar of their prejudice. "No," I said, my voice hard. Not Not this time. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street without really seeing it. The city lights were beginning to blur on. This time, we're done. I turned back to her. She was watching me, her expression wary, as if she was afraid to hope. I'm done, Alara. I'm so sorry. I should have been done years ago. I'm so sorry I let them do this to you. To us. A single tear traced a path through the graphite smudge on her cheek. It's not your fault, she whispered. It's them. It is my fault, I insisted. It's my fault for letting them, for enabling them, for asking you to endure it. That stops. Right now. I picked up my laptop from the coffee table, my fingers moving with a decisive energy I hadn't felt in years. I opened a travel website. Where do you want to go? I asked. She looked confused. What are you talking about? For Thanksgiving, I said, my eyes fixed on the screen. Someplace warm, someplace with an ocean, someplace with ramps and elevators and staff who are paid to be polite, someplace that isn't my mother's cramped, judgmental house. I found a resort in Mexico, a beautiful place with sprawling, accessible grounds and rooms that opened right onto the beach. The pictures showed wide, smooth pathways, roll-in showers, a pool with a hydraulic lift. It was a paradise designed for ease and dignity. It was the antithesis of my family's home. I booked it. 5 nights. Non-refundable. I typed in my credit card details with a feeling of exhilarating defiance. It was the most expensive, impulsive thing I had ever done, and it was the best money I had ever spent. As the confirmation page loaded, a wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. I wasn't just booking a vacation. I was buying our freedom. I was building a wall. Alara had wheeled herself over and was watching over my shoulder. When the booking confirmed message appeared, she let out a shaky breath that was half sob, half laugh. Are you serious? She asked, her eyes wide. Completely serious, I said, turning to face her. We leave Tuesday. I took a screenshot of the confirmation, the one with the picture of the infinity pool blending into the turquoise sea. I opened my messages. I went to the chat with my brother Mark. His ugly words were still there, hanging in the air. I didn't type a reply. I just attached the photo and hit send. No text, no explanation, just the picture. Let him figure it out. For 2 days, there was silence. It was a loud silence, ringing with unspoken fury. I could imagine the frantic phone calls between my brother and my mother, the indignation, the shock that their compliant son and brother had finally done something without their permission. I didn't care. Alara and I packed. We packed swimsuits and sun hats and her sketchbook. We didn't pack anything formal. We didn't pack the cranberry sauce I was supposed to bring. We didn't pack the years of resentment and obligation. We packed light. The trip was a revelation. It was like we could breathe again. We spent our days by the pool, reading and talking. Alara sketched the ocean, the palm trees, the laughing faces of strangers. She swam in the sea for the first time since the accident, supported by the warm, buoyant salt water. I watched her floating on her back, her face turned up to the sun, and I saw a glimpse of the woman she had been before, the carefree, fearless woman who had climbed mountains with me. The accident had taken her legs, but my family had been slowly, methodically trying to take her spirit. Here, it was coming back. I was seeing it return in real time. We ate dinner on a terrace overlooking the beach, the sound of the waves a constant, soothing rhythm. No one stared. No one offered condescending help. A waiter would see us approaching, and a small, discreet ramp would appear at a single step as if by magic. Menus were handed to both of us. Questions were addressed to her directly. She was not a problem to be managed. She was a guest, a person. It was all so simple, so normal, and it felt like a miracle. It highlighted just how monstrous my family's behavior truly was. Their cruelty wasn't just an opinion. It was an active choice to deny her this basic, human courtesy. On the morning of Thanksgiving, I woke up to the sun streaming into our room and the sound of the ocean. Alara was still asleep, her face relaxed and peaceful. I felt a pang of something sharp and painful in my chest. This was what it was supposed to feel like. This peace, this ease. This was the life I had almost allowed my family to poison beyond repair. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at it. It was a text from my mother. My stomach twisted into a familiar knot of dread. For a second, I considered not looking, just throwing the phone into the ocean. But a different, colder part of me was curious. What could she possibly have to say now? I opened it. The text was short, brutally mundane. It was as if the last week had never happened. As if my brother hadn't disinvited my wife from a family holiday. As if I hadn't flown to another country in response. It read, "Hope you're having a nice time. Don't forget to bring back the pie dish when you get home." It was Grandma's. The pie dish. Of course. The stupid, ugly ceramic pie dish with the faded floral pattern that I had used to bring a pumpkin pie to her house last Easter. It was a family heirloom, a symbol. It was a leash. She wasn't asking for the dish. She was telling me I still belonged to her. She was reminding me that I had obligations, that I was part of a system, a history, that I couldn't just escape. It was a power play, cloaked in the language of domesticity. It was her way of saying, this little rebellion of yours is cute, but now it's time to come home and get back in line. I looked at Alara, sleeping peacefully. I thought about the pity in my mother's eyes whenever she looked at her. I thought about my brother's sneering comfort, his casual cruelty. I thought about the years of slights, the 1,000 cuts that had almost bled our marriage dry. And I thought about the pie dish, sitting on a shelf in our kitchen, a forgotten relic of a life I was no longer willing to live. It was a tether to them, and I knew, with absolute clarity, that it was time to cut it. My thumbs moved over the screen, no longer trembling. They were steady. I typed the words that had been waiting, unsaid, for years. A reply not just to this text, but to all of them. To the slights, the insults, the exclusion, a final, definitive statement. I wrote, "The pie dish is at our apartment. Ask the able-bodied one to get it. I paused, my thumb over the send button. I realized my wording was imprecise. It could be misconstrued. I deleted it. I needed it to be clearer. I needed the finality to be absolute. I rewrote the message, making it surgically precise. The dish is at our apartment. Mark can get it. He has 2 working legs, so the stairs shouldn't be a problem. I read it back. It was petty. It was cruel. It was exactly what they deserved, but it still wasn't right. It was engaging on their level. My new resolve wasn't about being cruel. It was about being free. The cruelty was their language, not mine. I deleted the text again. The best response was the one that closed the door, not the one that threw another stone back at them. I thought about the real issue. It wasn't just the pie dish. It was the house itself. The house where Thanksgiving was meant to be held. My father had passed away 5 years ago, and in his will, he had left the house to my mother for her lifetime, but specified that upon her passing, ownership would be split equally between Mark and me. It was our childhood home. For years, I had helped with the mortgage, paid for repairs, invested my own money and time into its upkeep, believing it was a shared family asset, a future for all of us. Mark lived nearby and handled the day-to-day things, but my financial contribution was substantial. The pie dish text wasn't just about a dish. It was a subtle assertion of my mother's control over the property and, by extension, my brother's. They were reminding me that my access to everything, the home, the family, even a stupid piece of ceramic, was conditional. It was conditional on my compliance, on my willingness to show up alone and pretend everything was fine, on my willingness to leave my wife behind. This was bigger than Thanksgiving. This was about my future, my inheritance, and the years of financial and emotional investment I had poured into a family that was now treating me like an outcast. The cold anger returned, sharper than ever. This wasn't just an emotional slight. It was a financial threat. They were leveraging my connection to that house against me, and the thought that my money that could have gone toward a better, more accessible life for Alara and me was tied up in that house, the very sight of our exclusion, was sickening. Alara, I said softly. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. I'm sorry to wake you. It's okay, she murmured, stretching. What is it? I showed her my mother's text. She read it and a weary, resigned look crossed her face. Of course, she said. The dish. It's not about the dish, I said, my voice low and intense. It's about the house. It's about everything. I explained my sudden, terrifying realization that our fight wasn't just for dignity anymore. It was about to become a fight for what was rightfully mine. She listened patiently, her gaze never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So what are you going to do? She asked. Her voice was steady, without a trace of the fear that was churning in my gut. I'm going to call a lawyer, I said. The words felt strange and momentous. As soon as we get home, I'm not setting foot in that house again, and I'm getting my investment out of it. All of it. She reached out and took my hand. Good, she said, her grip firm. It's time. And in her eyes, I saw not fear or reluctance, but a fierce, unwavering support. She had been ready for this fight long before I was. She had just been waiting for me to catch up. I finally replied to my mother. My response was simple, devoid of the anger and sarcasm I was feeling. It was a clean, professional severance. Mom, we need to discuss my financial stake in the house. I will have my lawyer contact you and Mark next week to arrange the details of a buyout. I hit send. The die was cast. The war had begun. The rest of the vacation was colored by a new, anxious tension, but also a sense of purpose. We were no longer just escaping. We were preparing. We were a team. When we landed back home, the cold air felt different. It wasn't just weather. It was the climate of the conflict to come. Our apartment, once a simple home, now felt like a command center. The first thing I did was take the infamous pie dish, wrap it carefully in newspaper, put it in a box, and place it by the door. It was no longer a symbol of obligation. It was evidence. The day after we returned, I made the call. Finding a lawyer who specialized in family property disputes felt like a betrayal in itself, a formal declaration that my family was now an adversary. My voice shook as I explained the situation to a paralegal over the phone. I felt a deep, gut-wrenching shame. This was my family, my mother, my brother. We were supposed to be arguing about politics or who carved the turkey, not legal standing and financial equity. My first meeting with the lawyer, a woman named Miss Anya Sharma, was terrifying. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. I sat in her sterile, quiet office, Alara by my side, and I recounted the story. I started with the text about Thanksgiving, but Miss Sharma held up a hand. Go back, she said. Start from the beginning. Not the beginning of the fight, the beginning of the investment. When did you first put money into the house? So I did. I talked about my father's death, about the promise I made to him to always look after Mom. I explained the informal arrangement. Mark would handle the physical labor, the mowing, and the repairs, and I, living further away and earning more, would contribute a set amount each month towards the mortgage and property taxes. I had done it for 5 years. I had bank statements to prove it. I had emails with my mother and brother discussing major expenses, like the new roof we had all split the cost for 3 years ago. As I talked, laying out the financial history, a new narrative began to form. This wasn't just a story of emotional cruelty. It was a story of financial exploitation. I had been subsidizing the lives of the very people who despised my wife. My money was paying for the roof under which they felt uncomfortable by her existence. The injustice of it was so profound, it made me physically ill. Alara was a rock during that meeting. When my voice faltered, her hand would find mine. When I struggled to remember a date, she would quietly supply it. She had been paying closer attention than I had. She had seen the pattern long before I was willing to. She had kept a small notebook, she revealed, where she had occasionally jotted down dates dates and details of incidents, the forgotten ramps, the passive-aggressive comments, the canceled plans. She never told me about it, she said, because she didn't want me to feel like she was building a case against my family. But she had been. She had been quietly gathering the evidence of our slow, painful ostracization. Miss Sharma looked at Alara's notebook, then at my bank statements. This is good, she said, her voice crisp. The emotional context is important, but this, she tapped the financial records, this is leverage. They won't be able to claim your contributions were just gifts. You have a clear, documented history of investment. She laid out the strategy. The first step was a formal letter requesting a voluntary buyout of my share of the property's equity, based on my documented contributions and the initial terms of the will. They will refuse, she stated, not as a possibility, but as a fact. They will get nasty. They will try to paint you as greedy and unstable. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Alara. Her face was set, determined. Yes, I said. We are. The letter was sent, and just as Miss Sharma predicted, the blowback was immediate and brutal. My phone began to ring. Not from my mother or brother, but from my aunt, my cousins, my uncle, the whole extended family. They were calling, one by one, to tell me what a terrible person I was. The narrative they had been fed was simple and effective. I was trying to kick my own mother out of her house. I was a greedy, heartless son, manipulated by my bitter wife, who was using her disability to try and squeeze money out of the family. My brother, Mark, was the hero of their story, the dutiful son, protecting his grieving mother from his monstrous brother. How could you do this to your mother? My Aunt Carol sobbed over the phone. After all she's been through, that house is all she has left of your father. It didn't matter that I wasn't trying to kick her out. It didn't matter that I was only asking for my own investment back. The truth was irrelevant. The story was set. I was the villain. I tried to explain, to defend myself, but their minds were closed. They had chosen their side. This was the rock-bottom crisis. For a few days, I almost gave in. The weight of my entire family turning against me was crushing. I felt an immense, suffocating guilt. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was the monster. I sat up late one night, a bottle of whiskey on the table, the temptation to numb the pain almost overwhelming. I had struggled with drinking years ago, after my father died, and my family knew it. Mark had even alluded to it in a text to my cousin, which was then forwarded to me. He's not thinking straight. He gets like this sometimes. It's the pressure. They were using my past vulnerability against me, just as Miss Sharma had predicted. I stared at the bottle, the amber liquid looking like a promise of oblivion. Then I looked up and saw Alara in the doorway of the kitchen, watching me. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, her expression a mixture of fear and love and unwavering faith in me. She wasn't telling me what to do. She was just reminding me who I was fighting for, and who I would become if I gave up. I got up, poured the entire bottle of whiskey down the sink, and went to her. I buried my face in her shoulder and wept. I wept for my lost family, for my dead father, for the years I had wasted trying to please people who were impossible to please. We're going to get through this, she whispered, her hand stroking my hair. Together. From that night on, we operated as a unit. We screened our calls. We created a new email address for correspondence with Miss Sharma. We leaned on the one family member who hadn't taken their side, my father's younger brother, my Uncle Ben. He was a quiet, stoic man who had always been an outsider in the family, someone who valued integrity over appearances. He called me after hearing the rumors. Don't listen to them, kid, he said, his voice gruff. I know your father's will. I know what he wanted, and I know your mother and brother. You're doing the right thing. Don't let them bully you out of it. His validation was a lifeline in a sea of condemnation. We began the painstaking process of evidence compilation. Every nasty text was screenshotted. Every manipulative voicemail was saved. Alara's notebook became a key document, a timeline of slights that, when laid out chronologically, painted a damning picture of systematic exclusion. I spent hours with my bank statements, highlighting every transfer to my mother's account, every check written for a shared repair, creating a spreadsheet that quantified my 5 years of misplaced faith. It was a cold, miserable, but necessary task. It was the process of turning my grief into a weapon. Miss Sharma filed a petition to force a partition sale or a buyout. My mother and brother responded with a legal filing of their own. Their response was a masterpiece of character assassination. It claimed I was mentally unstable, an alcoholic, and that my financial contributions were voluntary gifts made out of love, which I was now trying to viciously claw back. They attached affidavits from my aunt and a cousin, attesting to my erratic behavior and my wife's divisive influence. They were trying to build a legal case based on the family gossip. They were trying to put my mental health on trial. Reading their words, their legal, notarized lies, was a unique kind of violation. It felt like they had reached into my past, into my most vulnerable moments of grief and depression, and twisted them into weapons to use against me. The document even mentioned Alara's accident, framing it as a tragic event that had left me overly protective and prone to irrational anger, as if my desire for my wife to be treated with basic human dignity was a symptom of a psychological disorder. This is standard procedure for them, Miss Sharma told me, her voice calm as I raged in her office. It's called muddying the water. They want to make you the issue so the court doesn't look at the actual issue, which is the money. Don't take the bait. Don't respond emotionally. We respond with facts. And so began the slow, grinding process of legal discovery. Lawyers exchanged documents. We filed motions. They filed counter-motions. Months dragged on. The emotional and financial toll was immense. My relationship with Alara was the only thing that kept me sane. We were an island, holding on to each other while the storm raged around us. The turning point, the evidentiary breakthrough, came from an unexpected place. My Uncle Ben, while helping his own mother migrate grandmother clean out her attic, found a box of my father's old papers. In it was a small, leather-bound journal. My father wasn't a man who wrote much, but in the last year of his life, as he was battling his illness, he had made a few entries. Most of it was about his treatments, his fears. But one entry, dated 2 months before he died, stood out. Uncle Ben called me, his voice tight with emotion. "You need to see this," he said. He drove over that evening and handed me the journal. I read the entry aloud to Alara and Miss Sharma, who we had asked to come to our apartment. My father had written, "Spoke with Mark today about the house. He has ideas about adding a deck. I told him to hold off. It's important to me that the house remains a home for both my boys equally. I worry Mark sees it as his own. I've made my will clear, but I told him again today, this is for you and your brother, together. Whatever you do it together. And you split it down the middle. It's half his, half yours. No arguments." It was a smoking gun. It wasn't a legal document, but it was a clear statement of my father's intent, written in his own hand. It directly contradicted my brother's claim that he was the designated steward of the property. More importantly, it directly supported my position. My father had seen this coming. He had worried about my brother's sense of entitlement, and he had tried to preempt it. Miss Sharma's eyes lit up as she read the passage. "This is incredible," she said. "This goes to intent. It completely demolishes their narrative that your brother was meant to be in charge and you were just a benevolent gift giver." She immediately filed a motion to have the journal entry admitted as evidence for the upcoming mediation. My mother's lawyer fought it, of course, calling it unauthenticated hearsay. But the existence of the journal changed the entire dynamic. We now had my father's voice in our corner. The mediation was scheduled. It was to be held in a neutral office building downtown. It wasn't a courtroom, but it felt just as intimidating. This would be the first time I would see my mother and brother in person since before the fateful Thanksgiving text. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was preparing for battle, but also for a funeral. I knew that whatever happened in that room, my family as I knew it would be officially dead. Alara held my hand the entire taxi ride to the mediator's office. "Just breathe," she said. "Look at me. Don't look at them. Just focus on me and Miss Sharma. We are your team." We walked into the conference room. They were already there, sitting on the opposite side of a long, polished table. My mother, looking smaller and older than I remembered, and Mark, his arms crossed, a smug, defiant look on his face. He didn't look at me. He looked at Alara, his eyes lingering on her chair with a look of undisguised contempt. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes at all. She just stared at her hands, clasped tightly on the table. The tension in the room was suffocating. The mediator, a calm professional man, laid out the rules. No yelling, no personal attacks. We were here to discuss the disposition of the property. Their lawyer began, repeating the same lies from their legal filings. He painted me as an unstable, greedy son, and Mark as the responsible one. I felt the old rage building, the familiar shame. I looked across the table at my brother, who was nodding along, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. Then it was Miss Sharma's turn. She was magnificent. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't get emotional. She just laid out the facts, one by one, like a surgeon laying out her instruments. She started with the will. Then she moved to my 5 years of bank statements, presenting a binder with every single transfer highlighted. She showed the invoices for the new roof, with emails from me, Mark, and my mother discussing the three-way split. She built an undeniable, methodical case that this was a shared financial investment. Then, she paused. "Now," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "my client did not want to bring this up. He wanted to keep this purely a financial matter, but the respondents have chosen to attack his character, his mental state, and his marriage. So we need to provide some context for why this relationship deteriorated to the point of litigation." She picked up a single piece of paper. It was a printout of the text message. She read it out loud into the silent room. "She makes people uncomfortable." My mother flinched as if she'd been struck. Mark's smirk vanished, replaced by a dark scowl. Miss Sharma wasn't done. She then read aloud from Ilara's notebook a few select entries. October 12th, family dinner at the Oak Room. I called ahead to confirm ramp access. Carol said she did, but when we arrived, there were 5 steps. Mark said, "Oh, well, we can just lift her." I spent the entire dinner feeling like a piece of furniture. August 4th, family barbecue. Mom repeatedly tried to cut my food for me, saying, "It must be so hard for you with your hands." My condition doesn't affect my hands. She read 3 more entries, each one a small, perfectly rendered portrait of casual cruelty and exclusion. With each word, I could feel the power shifting in the room. Their lawyer began to shuffle his papers, looking uncomfortable. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about decency. Finally, Miss Sharma placed the printouts on the table. "This isn't about greed," she said, her eyes on my mother. "This is about dignity. My client is simply asking to be financially disentangled from a family that has made it painfully clear they do not respect his wife or his marriage." The mediator looked at my mother and brother. "Do you have a response to this?" he asked quietly. My mother just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. But Mark, my brother, leaned forward, and then it happened. The villain monologue, the confession. He wasn't speaking to the mediator or the lawyers. He was speaking to me. "You know what?" he spat, his face contorted with a rage that had been simmering for years. "Yeah, I said it, and I meant it. It is uncomfortable. Everything has to revolve around her. Everything. The restaurants, the bathrooms, the ramps, the special parking, our lives, our family traditions. Everything has to bend and break to accommodate her. She can't just be normal," he continued, his voice rising. "Dad would have hated this. He would have hated seeing our family turned upside down like this. He wanted us to be strong, to be normal. And you parade her around like some kind of trophy of your own suffering. You think it makes you a saint? It doesn't. It makes you a joke. And you're trying to steal mom's house to pay for it all. It's sick. It was all there. The jealousy, the resentment, the twisted logic. He didn't see a person in a wheelchair. He saw an inconvenience. He saw a threat to his idea of normal. He saw his inheritance being threatened not by me, but by the potential future costs of Alara's care. He had confessed to everything, not just the text, but the entire hateful ideology behind it. He did it with a sense of righteous pride, believing he was the one speaking the hard truth. The room was dead silent. Their own lawyer looked horrified. He tried to quiet Mark, but the dam had broken. Miss Sharma just sat there, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her face. She had poked the bear, and the bear had incriminated himself perfectly. I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt a profound, empty pity. He was so trapped in his own bitterness, his own small, mean view of the world. The final piece of evidence was my father's journal. Miss Sharma presented a certified copy. She read his words about wanting the house to be for both of us, split down the middle. My mother started to sob openly now, a gut-wrenching, painful sound. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for herself because our family was publicly, formally imploding, and she knew she had let it happen. The mediator called for a break. Miss Sharma, Alara, and I went into a small side room. Well, Miss Sharma said, closing the door. That was more effective than I could have hoped. When we reconvened, the atmosphere had completely changed. Their lawyer looked defeated. He spoke in hushed tones with my mother and a still fuming Mark. After a few minutes, he cleared his throat. My clients, he said, are prepared to offer a settlement. The offer was everything we had asked for. A full buyout of my equity, based on the current market value of the house and my documented contributions. There were no conditions, no gag orders. It was a complete and total capitulation. I looked at Miss Sharma. She nodded. We accept, she said. Legal documents were drawn up and signed. I signed my name, officially relinquishing my claim to my childhood home. My brother signed, his hand tense, his jaw clenched. My mother's signature was a shaky, illegible scrawl. I never made eye contact with them again. We stood up, and without a word, Alara and I walked out of the room, leaving the wreckage of our family behind us. The justice was incomplete, of course. No amount of money could undo the years of hurt. No legal document could erase the words my brother had said or the silence my mother had kept. I had won the battle over the house, but I had lost my family. It was a victory that felt like a funeral. In the weeks that followed, I went to therapy. I talked about the anger, but also the grief. The deep, aching grief for the family I thought I had, the mother I thought loved me unconditionally, the brother I thought was my friend. My therapist helped me understand that the family I was grieving for had never really existed. It was an illusion I had maintained through constant sacrifice and denial. The real family was the one I saw in that mediation room, bitter, prejudiced, and cruel. Losing them wasn't a loss. It was an escape. The settlement money arrived in my bank account, a large, sterile number. It felt like blood money, but Alara helped me see it differently. It's not blood money, she said one evening, as we looked at real estate listings. It's restitution. It's the funding for our future, a future they don't get to be a part of. We used it to buy a house, a beautiful single-story home with wide doorways, smooth floors, and a garden that Alara could access easily. We designed a bathroom with a perfect roll-in shower. We built a ramp to the front door that was so elegant it looked like an architectural feature. We were building a world that was designed for us, for our life, with no compromises. We were building a fortress of peace. We moved in a few months later. Unpacking our boxes, we found the pie dish. It was still in the box by the door of our old apartment, a forgotten soldier from a war that was now over. I held it in my hands. Grandma's pie dish. A relic from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I almost threw it away, but Alara stopped me. No, she said, keep it. Let it remind you of how far we've come. So I placed it on a high shelf in the pantry, a monument to a severed past. Life became quiet, peaceful. We had new traditions. We hosted our own Thanksgiving with Uncle Ben and a few close friends. Our home was filled with laughter and warmth and people who loved Alara for exactly who she was. The silence from my family was absolute. I blocked their numbers. I had no desire to hear from them ever again. I was healing. We were healing. Then, about a year after the mediation, a text message slipped through. It was from my mother, from a new number. I almost deleted it without reading, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. It was breathtaking in its audacity, its complete lack of self-awareness. It was as if the lawsuit, the mediation, the complete destruction of our relationship had been a minor squabble. The text read, "Hello, I am cleaning out the attic, and I need the large blue suitcase that belonged to your father. It should be in your garage. I will have Mark swing by on Saturday to pick it up." I stared at the phone, but this time, I didn't feel rage or pain. I felt nothing. It was like looking at a message from a stranger, a particularly clueless and entitled stranger. The suitcase, the pie dish. It was always something, always a demand, always an assumption of access, an assumption of my compliance. They had learned nothing. They never would. I thought about a dozen cutting replies. I thought about sending her a bill for my therapy. I thought about reminding her that she had a son named Mark who was perfectly capable of buying his own suitcase, but I didn't. Engaging was a trap. It was what they wanted. It was an invitation back into their drama. Instead, I walked out into our garden. Alara was there, tending to her roses, her face lit by the afternoon sun. She looked up and smiled at me. The peace I felt in that moment was real, hard-won, and more valuable than any house or inheritance. It was the prize. It was the victory. I went back inside, picked up my phone, and typed my final reply to the woman who was once my mother. It was short. It was final. It was the boundary made manifest. That suitcase was donated to charity 6 months ago along with all other remaining items from my former life. life. Please do not contact me again. I blocked the new number. I felt the last tether snap. I was finally completely free. My life was my own. Our life was our own, and it was beautiful. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard.